My name is Grace Olden, and once I believed family meant unconditional love. I was wrong. On the day I buried my husband and two children, my family hosted a champagne-soaked birthday party for my brother. They didn't come to the funeral, not even a message. That day, something inside me died. But from those ashes, I rebuilt not just my life, but a legacy they never saw coming. If you think this is a story about grief, you're only half right. This is a war story, and I'm not the fallen soldier. I'm the survivor who chose to fight back. The Olden estate gleamed like something out of a movie: polished marble floors, golden chandeliers, and walls lined with portraits of ancestors staring down with judgmental pride. But for Grace Olden, tonight's grand birthday gala felt more like a cage gilded in guilt. She stood near the towering cake, its frosting shaped into the Olden Market logo, surrounded by guests toasting her 39th year. And yet she'd never felt more alone. "Smile, Grace," her mother whispered, her lips barely moving as she adjusted the diamond necklace on Grace's collarbone. Vivian Olden was flawless as ever, with ice-blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon, eyes cold behind a mask of civility. "You look like you're mourning instead of celebrating." "Maybe I am," Grace thought, but said nothing. She scanned the ballroom full of shareholders, politicians, and distant relatives who didn't know her middle name. Not one person here had asked what she wanted, only what Edward Olden, her father, expected. She had been born into this, the firstborn of the Olden dynasty, the heir apparent to a supermarket empire that prided itself on exclusivity, indulgence, and image. Since she was 10, she'd been shadowing board meetings, reciting quarterly earnings like nursery rhymes, and memorizing the difference between imported French truffle oil and local knockoffs. Her life had been engineered for succession, but in all those years, she had never once been asked if she wanted the throne. Edward Olden appeared beside her, cutting through the crowd like a blade in a business suit. Tall, commanding, with silver-streaked hair and a jaw carved by expectation. He placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. "We need to talk," he said, steering her away from the clinking glasses and forced smiles. In the adjacent lounge, the noise dimmed. "Why did you block the Tuscaniani acquisition?" he asked, voice low but sharp. "That vineyard is a prestige asset." Grace crossed her arms. "Because it's a vanity project, it costs millions and adds nothing to our core strategy. We're supposed to be optimizing logistics, not collecting status symbols." Edward's jaw tightened. "You're not a rebel, Grace. You're an Olden. Don't confuse intelligence with disobedience. Shareholders want confidence, not opinions. And I want a company that serves people, not just stock portfolios." She snapped, then caught herself. She could feel it. Every word she spoke was a crack in the legacy she was supposed to uphold. He shook his head, disappointed but unsurprised. "You know who never argued? Blake. Of course, her younger brother, the golden child, handsome, charming, effortlessly agreeable." While Grace fought to be seen, Blake coasted on Edward's approval like it was his birthright. He'd never had to fight for anything. Grace fought, and for that, she was punished. "I'm not Blake," she said simply. "No, you're not," Edward replied, turning away as if dismissing a bad investment. Before she could respond, a crash interrupted the tension. From the hallway, a silver tray of imported cheeses and figs had fallen to the floor, the waiter scrambling to clean the mess. Grace moved instinctively to help, but paused when she saw his face. He wasn't a waiter, or rather, he didn't look like one. He wore a vendor's apron, sleeves rolled up, arms strong from labour, eyes sharp with curiosity. He glanced at her, startled, and then smirked. "Sorry about the theatrics," he said, crouching. "Guess I'm better at sourcing food than serving it." Grace blinked. "You're not staff. Logan Hayes," he said, standing now, holding a wedge of Monago in one hand and extending the other. "Owner of Farm Direct Supply. We deliver specialty ingredients. One of your chefs insisted on my freshest batch." She hesitated before shaking his hand. His grip was firm, honest, not the empty handshake of boardroom politics. "Grace Alden," she said out of habit more than pride. "I know," he said with a half smile, hard not to recognize the crown princess. Her lips twitched despite herself. The moment lasted barely seconds, but something shifted. Not in the room, in her. Here, amid the artificial glow of her own birthday party, Grace had met someone real. After the birthday party, Grace didn't expect to see Logan Hayes again. But fate, or something mischievous, had other plans. 3 weeks later, she attended a conference on supply chain innovation in San Francisco. She was halfway through a dry keynote on predictive analytics when a familiar voice interrupted the boredom. Imagine if local farmers could reach shelves in under 24 hours without bleeding margins dry. Grace turned in her seat. There he was, sleeves rolled up again, standing at the front of a panel titled "Disrupting Distribution from Farm to City in a Day." Logan Hayes wasn't just a charming vendor with good cheese. He was a thinker, a builder, someone who saw food not just as a product, but a mission. His presentation was unpolished but passionate, sprinkled with wit and the kind of sincerity that made executives uncomfortable. Later in the networking lounge, Grace found herself walking toward him. "Twee in a month," Logan said with a grin. "If I believed in fate, I'd say the supply gods are shipping us together." "You were good," she said, catching herself. "You made efficiency sound almost romantic. That's my secret. Logistics is sexy," he joked. Then his smile softened. "But seriously, thanks. I'm just trying to make fresh food accessible. People shouldn't have to choose between dinner and dignity." They sat, talked, and what started as professional curiosity turned into late-night emails, coffee shop brainstorms, and eventually walks that lasted longer than either admitted they'd intended. Grace, who had always calculated risk before emotion, found herself skipping the math. But just as things deepened, Logan pulled back. One evening, over a modest dinner at a food truck festival, he seemed unusually quiet. "I need to tell you something," he said, setting down his fork. Before we go any further, Grace nodded, sensing the shift in air. "My father's Franklin Hayes." She blinked, as in Hayes Fresh. "The very one," he said. "Public enemy number 1 in your father's war diary." Grace laughed, but it died in her throat. "You're serious?" Logan nodded. "I've been in this industry since I was a kid. I used to deliver tomatoes with my dad in a beat-up van. We built Hayes Fresh to challenge giants like Alden Market, not to destroy them, but to offer an alternative. And years ago, I tried to build a pilot logistics startup. Got a bit of traction, even attracted investors." "What happened?" Logan hesitated. "Your father happened. Edward Alden filed a lawsuit claiming I had stolen proprietary routing data. It was bogus, but it was loud. Legal fees wiped me out. Investors vanished. I had to start from scratch." Grace felt the colour drain from her face. She remembered that case vaguely, a footnote in Alden Market's internal reports. She'd never known names, never cared to ask. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "I figured you didn't," he replied, "and I didn't tell you earlier because I wanted you to see me before you saw my last name." Grace stood, excused herself, walked aimlessly through the crowd, her mind reeling. This was more than complicated, it was impossible. Her father had destroyed Logan's early career, and she, his daughter, heir to the empire, was falling for him. The next few days were a blur. She skipped family dinners, ignored board messages. She sat in her apartment reading over the old internal memos about the case. The more she read, the more she saw how flimsy the evidence was, how calculated the timing had been, and how easily her father had destroyed someone to protect his dominance. Twist 2 hit like a wave. Edward Alden hadn't just ruined a competitor, he'd ruined a man with purpose, a man Grace was beginning to love. That night, she packed a small suitcase and drove to Logan's apartment. He opened the door, surprised. "I can't live in a house built on fear," she said. "I can't inherit a legacy that crushes good people." Logan didn't say anything at first. Then slowly he stepped aside to let her in. That was the night Grace Alden left behind the name she'd been born with. The dinner table sparkled with crystal glasses and over-polished silverware, a gallery of Alden Market's top shareholders seated like royalty. Grace sat across from her father, her posture rigid, trying to pretend she hadn't just detonated a familial landmine. This wasn't a dinner, it was an ambush. Edward Alden tapped the side of his glass. "Let's not waste time," he said. "I have an announcement." The room stilled. Forks froze mid-air. "My daughter Grace has chosen to pursue personal interests that conflict with the Alden legacy," he continued, his tone surgical. "Effective immediately, she is no longer part of the succession plan for Alden Market." Grace's stomach dropped. "And she will no longer reside on this estate," Edward added. "This house belongs to the Aldens who honor it." Gasps scattered across the table like shards of glass. Grace glanced at her mother. Vivian looked down at her plate, lips tight, refusing to meet her daughter's eyes. Grace stood slowly. "You're downing me at a shareholder dinner." Edward's voice remained cold. "You've disowned yourself, Grace. By aligning with the son of Franklin Hayes, you've made your choice." "I didn't realize love required your permission," she said, louder than she intended. "That's not love," he snapped. "It's betrayal. You had one job: protect the Alden name." Grace turned and walked away, heels clicking across marble floors that had never felt so foreign. As she passed the hallway toward the staircase, a soft voice stopped her. "Wait!" It was Vivian. She stepped out from the shadows, clutching something in her hand. "I couldn't stop him," she whispered, eyes glassy. "I tried, but you know how your father is." Grace said nothing. Vivian opened her palm. Nestled in it was a delicate gold chain with a sapphire pendant, the Alden heirloom worn by every first daughter for 4 generations. "I wore it the night I married your father," she said. "I thought maybe one day you'd pass it to your daughter." Grace looked at it. And now Vivian pressed it into her hand. "Now I just want you to survive him. No hug, no tears, just a quiet gesture from a mother trapped in her own silence." That night, Grace packed what she could, mostly clothes and notebooks, and drove away without a destination. She didn't cry. Not then, not yet. There was too much rage clogging the space where grief should have lived. Logan welcomed her into his apartment, a modest 30th floor walk-up in Seattle. The stairs creaked, the radiator clanked, and the windows fogged in the mornings. But it was hers now, a life not born from expectation, but from choice. They ate ramen from mismatched bowls on a couch with one sagging cushion, laughing at how neither of them could cook. They made plans over coffee, wrote ideas on napkins, and dreamed of something bigger, a logistics platform that could revolutionize how food moved in America. "We'll call it Fresh Root," Logan said one night, scribbling the name across a takeout menu. "It's not about luxury, it's about life, speed, freshness, dignity." Grace looked around. No chandeliers, no oil paintings, no legacy breathing down her neck. But there was something better. Hope. They married in early spring beneath the canopy of cherry blossoms in a small park near Seattle's Queen Anne neighborhood. Grace wore a simple ivory dress she found at a vintage shop. Logan wore the same suit he used for vendor meetings. There were no fireworks, no designer cakes, no luxury limousines, only laughter, a hank-knit bouquet, and two folding chairs arranged in front of an officiant who kept mispronouncing Grace's middle name. No one from the Olden side attended, not a card, not a call, but Franklin and Helen Hayes were there. Franklin, tall and proud despite a weathered coat, walked Grace down the aisle. Helen wiped tears from her eyes every 2 minutes, bursting with joy like it was her own daughter getting married. They gifted Grace and Logan a hand-carved wooden crib that Franklin had made himself. "I always hoped we'd use it again," he said. "I guess we finally will." And they did. A year later, Harper was born, wide-eyed and fiercely curious from the first breath. She'd gripped Grace's fingers so tight it made her laugh through the tears. 2 years after that, Noah came into the world quietly, the calm to his sister's storm. He rarely cried, preferring to observe everything like he was cataloguing the world for later. The apartment stayed small, but their world grew wide. Grace and Logan worked late into the night developing Fresh Root software, juggling diaper changes with delivery models. They couldn't afford childcare, so Harper sometimes sat in meetings babbling beside a whiteboard, and Noah napped in a laundry basket lined with blankets. The exhaustion was constant, but so was the joy. Every first word, every crooked crayon drawing taped to the fridge, every grocery trip where Harper demanded to test the grapes. These were moments that filled Grace in ways boardrooms never could. Then came the letter. It arrived in a plain white envelope, no return address, only her name handwritten in ink that bled at the edges. Grace opened it slowly, heart pounding with an instinct she hadn't felt in years. Inside was a single typed message. "We believe the company deserves a better future. Will you talk?" Attached was a private email address and 3 initials, DLR. Her breath caught. Douglas L. Renshaw, one of the original investors in Olden Market, a man older than her father but twice as ruthless. He'd once overseen acquisitions across 3 continents. If he was reaching out now, something was very wrong inside Olden. Grace didn't reply immediately. She paced the living room that night, watching Harper sleep in Logan's lap, listening to Noah breathe softly in the next room. "What's wrong?" Logan asked, sensing the tension. She handed him the note. He read it, then looked at her. "Do you want to?" Grace hesitated. I don't know." He nodded, not pushing. That night, she stayed up reading old financials, tracing back Olden Market's trajectory. Sales were flatlining. The brand had grown stale. Edward's leadership was cracking, and someone on the inside wanted to pry it open. 3 days later, she opened her email, drafted a reply, and deleted it. She didn't want back in. She didn't want to climb a throne built on betrayal, even if she had every right to claim it. The next morning, she typed a short message. "Thank you, but I have everything I need right here. Grace." She hit send, then closed her laptop. Outside, the sun was rising over Seattle. Harper was already stirring, asking for pancakes in her tiny, bossy voice. Logan hummed in the kitchen, flipping batter with one hand while bouncing Noah on his hip. Grace stood in the doorway, barefoot, hair a mess, heart full. She had walked away from power, and somehow she'd found something far more valuable. The sky that morning was impossibly blue, as if someone had scrubbed the clouds away just for them. Logan packed the cooler, while Grace wrestled Harper into her sneakers. Noah, as usual, was already by the door holding his favorite stuffed giraffe, eyes wide with quiet anticipation. They drove an hour outside Seattle to a state park surrounded by tall evergreens and a lake that shimmered like melted glass. The kids squealed when they saw ducks paddling near the shore. Grace spread out a checkered blanket under a tree while Logan grilled sandwiches on a portable skillet. They laughed, real easy laughter. Harper insisted the ants near the basket were guests and gave them grapes. Noah trailed behind her like a shadow, occasionally turning back to make sure his mother was still in view. For a few hours, time melted. Grace lay on the grass with Logan, watching the clouds shift into dragons and pirate ships. They talked about nothing and everything. Fresh Root's next pitch, whether Harper would like soccer, what colour to paint the bathroom. "Let's do this every Sunday," Logan murmured, brushing her hair from her forehead. Grace smiled, eyes closed. Deal. They packed up as the sun began to dip, casting long golden shadows across the field. Harper was asleep within minutes in the back seat, clutching her butterfly kite. Noah leaned against her shoulder, his thumb in his mouth. Logan drove, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on Grace's leg. She hummed a lullaby, one her mother used to sing when she was a child, back when things still felt warm. Then came the blinding light, a truck, massive wrong lane, no time. Grace only had time to shout his name, Logan. And then nothing. Darkness. She awoke to the antiseptic sting of hospital lights and the beep of a monitor that sounded like it was measuring someone else's life. Her head pounded, her left arm was heavy. Her mouth was dry, her throat raw. A nurse stood at the edge of the bed, clipboard in hand. "You're awake," she said gently. Grace tried to sit up. "My husband, my kids, where are they?" The nurse hesitated. "I'll get the doctor." That pause told her everything. When the doctor arrived, he looked like he'd aged a decade since entering the room. He sat beside her, voice low. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm so sorry. The accident, it was catastrophic. Your husband and children didn't survive." The words didn't register. They echoed, bounced around her skull like meaningless noise. She stared at him, waiting for him to correct himself, for someone to tell her it was a mix-up, that they were in another room, maybe bruised or bandaged, but no one came. She tried to stand, screaming Logan's name, then Harper's, then Noah's. Her arm gave out, her knees buckled. The doctor and nurse rushed to hold her down. She clawed at their scrubs, begging. "They were just here," she cried. "We had a picnic. We had grapes. They were just here." They injected her with something cold, heavy. Her limbs turned to stone. Her voice dissolved. Tears streamed silently as the ceiling spun overhead. She had known pain before, disappointment, exile, heartbreak. But nothing had prepared her for this. This was something else entirely. This was the day time stopped. The funeral was held in a small white church nestled in the suburbs of Portland, just a few blocks from where Logan had grown up. There was no cathedral choir, no marble headstones, no silk-draped pews, just wooden benches, wild flowers, and a priest who spoke gently and slowly, as if trying not to shatter what little was left of Grace's soul. 3 caskets stood at the front, Logan's full-sized, and 2 unbearably small ones beside it. Harper's was painted pale yellow, her favourite colour. Grace had tucked her butterfly kite beneath the lid. Noah's was soft grey, his stuffed giraffe placed gently near his hands. Grace stood before them, her knees trembling beneath a simple black dress. Franklin and Helen Hayes sat in the front row, hollow-eyed and trembling. The few friends who had stayed in their lives over the years filled in the rest. No cameras, no spectacle, just grief. She cleared her throat, unfolding a piece of paper that crinkled from her. Shaking hands. "I could talk about how they lived," she began, voice thin and breaking. "But that would take forever, so instead I'll talk about how they loved." She paused, staring at the caskets. Logan loved fiercely. He believed food could change the world. He believed people, no matter how poor, deserved to eat with dignity. He danced in the kitchen with our kids while burning pancakes, and he told me I was beautiful even when I was in sweatpants and hadn't slept in days. Her lips trembled. Harper loved loudly. She was curious and fearless, and once told me she wanted to be a scientist or a chef or a dragon, depending on the day. Soft chuckles escaped from a few mourners. Noah loved quietly. He watched the world like it was a book he couldn't wait to read. He hummed when he was happy. And he always held my finger when we crossed the street. She folded the paper again, unable to continue. Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. Later, at the graveside, Grace stood motionless as the dirt thudded over the wood. She felt nothing. Not rain, not cold, not even her own heartbeat. Only a void where once there had been a family. That night, alone in the guest room at Helen and Franklin's home, she checked her phone out of reflex. There were no missed calls, no voicemails, only one unread text message from a number she still had memorized. "Vivian Olden, we heard. We're sorry, but we've already made our choice. Happy birthday to Blake. I hope you're happy with yours." Grace stared at it, her mind trying to process the meaning. She opened a browser and typed Alden Estate, Blake Alden. Photos flooded the screen. Blake in a tuxedo, champagne glass raised, surrounded by social lights, fireworks, laughter. Headlines: Alden Heir celebrates milestone birthday with 2 WMAL's gala. The same date, the same hour. While she buried her husband and children, her family had been celebrating. She threw the phone across the room. It cracked against the dresser and slid to the floor, screen flickering. That was the final blow. Not just the absence, but the message behind it. "We chose him. You are no longer ours." She walked outside into the night barefoot, the wind biting against her skin. She stared up at the sky, blinking back tears until they finally spilled. "I am no one's mistake," she whispered. "Not anymore." That night, Grace Alden, daughter of wealth, once heir to a legacy, died in spirit. Only Grace remained. The days that followed the funeral bled together, grey and formless. Grace wandered through Franklin and Helen's house like a ghost, wrapped in silence, too heavy for words. Her body moved. She showered, she dressed, she ate small bites of toast. but her mind remained fixed in that moment beside the three caskets. Unable to step forward or backward, she couldn't bring herself to return to the apartment in Seattle. Too many memories, too many ghosts in too small a space. She knew where Harper's muddy shoes would be still by the door, where Noah's blanket would be half folded on the couch, where Logan's to-do list would still hang beside the fridge. She wasn't ready to see those things. One afternoon, while helping Helen sort through a storage box from Logan's early days, Grace came across a navy blue notebook with frayed edges and faded gold lettering on the cover, fresh in 24. Her breath caught. She opened the book slowly. Page after page was filled with Logan's handwriting, diagrams of cold storage routes, pricing models for low-income neighborhoods, lists of farm co-ops in rural areas, ideas for cutting transportation costs without sacrificing quality. Each section began with the same phrase: "Everyone deserves to eat well, not just the wealthy." Grace traced her fingers over the ink, feeling like he was speaking to her from beyond the veil. She read through the night, sitting on the floor in a pool of lamplight. The margins were filled with Harper's doodles, smiley faces, and crooked hearts. Noah had once scribbled a crayon streak right over the blueprint for a 2-hour delivery radius. It was imperfect. It was alive. It was Logan. The next morning, Franklin found her at the kitchen table, eyes red, hands still holding the book. "You found it," he said quietly. She nodded, unable to speak. He poured 2 cups of coffee, sat beside her. "He showed me that notebook once, said it was just a dream, said maybe one day someone braver would make it real." Grace closed the book. He was brave. "You are too," Franklin said, "but you don't have to be yet. You just have to take the next step." She stared at the steam rising from her cup, then said, "I think I know what that is." That evening, she took out a sheet of heavy cream-colored paper and wrote 3 letters, each in perfect, steady handwriting. "Dear Father, thank you for making your priorities so clear. Thank you for choosing Blake's birthday over my family's funeral. Thank you for confirming what I always feared, that I was never your daughter, only your legacy. I no longer carry your name. I will no longer serve your empire. You buried me the day you raised that champagne glass. Let this be the last thing I ever write to you. Grace, dear mother, you used to sing to me when I was sick. I remember your voice more than your words." But somewhere along the way, silence replaced it. "You stood by him again, as you always have. I needed you just once, and you didn't come. I don't hate you. I'm just done hoping you'll change. Goodbye, Grace. Dear Blake, you won. Congratulations, Grace." She folded the letters, sealed them, and walked to the nearest mailbox. Each step away from that house, from that identity, from that pain felt lighter. She dropped the letters in the blue metal box, the envelopes making a soft thud as they slid inside. She turned, walked away. Grace Alden had finally burned the bridge behind her, and she didn't look back. The first day, Grace walked into Hayes Fresh headquarters. She carried Logan's notebook pressed against her chest like a shield. The office was modest. No marble floors, no valet parking, no mahogany boardroom tables. But there was something different in the air. Purpose. Employees called Franklin Uncle Frank. They wore denim and flannel, not designer suits. On the break room fridge, someone had taped a sign that read, "We're not just feeding customers, we're feeding futures." Franklin introduced her not as a grieving widow, not as a former Alden heir, but as Grace Hayes, our new Director of Strategic Development. The room applauded. She almost cried. In the weeks that followed, Grace dove into Logan's vision, treating each page of his notebook like scripture. She worked alongside supply managers, coders, truck drivers. She asked questions no one had asked since Logan died. What if we cut storage time in half? What if we built pop-up depots near underserved zip codes? What if we proved that speed and dignity could coexist? And slowly, Fresh in 24 wasn't just a dream, it was a blueprint. She built a pilot project across 3 neighborhoods in Tacoma. Delivery times dropped, produce waste plummeted. Customers, families on food stamps, minimum wage workers, seniors lined up with baskets full for the first time. Every win felt like a whisper from Logan. "You're doing it, Grace." Then one morning, an unmarked package arrived at her desk. Inside was a flash drive and a single note typed in courier font. "You know where to look. Let them fall. D." She stared at it for a long time. Her first instinct was suspicion. The last time anonymous hands touched her life, they'd brought pain. But curiosity and caution coiled together, and she inserted the drive into her laptop. What she found wasn't just information, it was dynamite. The drive held internal memos, shipment logs, and pricing strategies from Alden Market's internal servers, specifically the division responsible for urban store expansion. The documents revealed a festering network of inefficiencies, bloated contracts with exclusive suppliers, backdoor deals with overpriced transport firms, and algorithms that deliberately excluded low-income areas from profitable delivery routes. One file flagged in red showed Edward had personally approved a program nicknamed Filter Flow, designed to divert fresh goods away from neighborhoods deemed non-premium. Grace's stomach turned. She printed everything. When she brought it to Franklin, he frowned. "This is real," she nodded. "Where did you get it?" "I don't know." The note was signed. D. Franklin scratched his beard. Renshaw, Douglas L. Renshaw, the Alden investor who had once reached out to her after the funeral. Grace hadn't replied back then, but maybe someone on the inside hadn't given up. "What are you going to do with this?" Franklin asked. Grace looked down at Logan's notebook, open beside her, a page marked with one of his scribbled questions. "Can we build a system that doesn't leave people behind?" She met Franklin's eyes. "We use it not to destroy them, but to build better, to show people there's another way." He nodded slowly. "Then let's start pulling the bricks out one by one." From that day, Grace launched a quiet, precise campaign. She targeted Alden Market's blind spots, inner city districts they had abandoned, farm co-ops they had refused to negotiate with, logistics corridors they had deemed too inefficient. Where Alden said not worth it, Hayesh said, "Watch us." Grace wasn't fighting for revenge. She was fighting for Logan's dream. And one spreadsheet at a time, she was winning. The first billboard went up outside Chicago. A mother held a basket of fresh produce, smiling down at her daughter in bold white letters across a green backdrop. "Eat well, live well." Below it in smaller print, Hayes Fresh, Fresh in 24, no exceptions. Within weeks, the slogan was everywhere. Bus stops, radio ads, YouTube pre-rolls. Grace hadn't just launched a marketing campaign. She had launched a message, a declaration that fresh quality food was no longer the privilege of the wealthy. The idea was simple, rooted in Logan's original notes. What if no one had to choose between eating well and living well? And America responded. Customers shared photos of their first affordable arugula salads. Single mothers tweeted thanks with photos of stocked refrigerators. Farmers in Ohio and Kentucky posted videos praising Hayes Fresh for honoring fair contracts and quick pickups. The media dubbed it the grocery revolution, and at its center was one reluctant figure, Grace Hayes. Of course, they didn't call her that. Most headlines still used her old name, Grace Olden Defects, Heir Becomes Disruptor, The Betrayal of the Billion-Dollar Daughter, or worse, The A's with a Conscience, as if morality was something to be ashamed of. TV anchors debated her motives. Was she an idealist, a traitor, a woman grieving and lashing out? No one could decide. But the loudest voice came from someone who had never stayed silent. Blake. He appeared on national television during prime time, seated across from a polished anchor who introduced him as Blake Alden, COO of Alden Market. Blake wore a navy suit, tie perfectly knotted, hair slicked back like their father's. "I want to be clear," he said, staring into the camera. The slogan, "Eat Well, Live Well," was conceived inside Alden Market nearly 5 years ago. We have documentation. It was part of a shelved campaign due to market shifts. Grace had access to these files during her time with the company. The anchor raised a brow. "So you're accusing her of intellectual theft?" "I'm saying," Blake replied, "that what Hayes Fresh is doing is built on stolen ideas and emotional manipulation. This isn't innovation, it's exploitation of grief, of guilt, of branding." The clip went viral within hours. Grace sat in the Hayes Fresh office that evening, the sound muted but the headlines flashing across her screen. She watched Blake smile for the camera, watched him lie with the ease of someone who had never been told no. Franklin stood behind her, arms crossed. "We expected this," she nodded. "Still hurts." He leaned down, placed a hand on her shoulder. "You built something real. They only know how to fake it." That night, she received dozens of media requests for comment. She declined them all except one. The next morning, Grace recorded a short video from her office using her own phone. No script, no lighting crew. She looked directly into the lens. "My name is Grace Hayes. Some of you know me as Grace Alden. I don't hide from that name. I walked away from it because I believed in something better." She held up Logan's notebook, now worn and bookmarked with yellow tabs. "This was written by my late husband, Logan Hayes, years ago before Alden ever considered a single neighborhood outside a luxury zip code." She paused. "I'm not here to win headlines. I'm here to keep a promise that no child should go to bed hungry, that no family should feel ashamed at the checkout line, that fresh food belongs to everyone." She ended the video with 5 words, "Let the work speak louder," and it did. The video was viewed over 3 million times in 48 hours. But the war was only beginning. 3 days after Blake's televised accusation, Grace held a press conference, not at a hotel ballroom or luxury conference center, but in the warehouse of a Hayes Fresh fulfillment center in Tacoma. Forklifts buzzed in the background. Employees paused on the mezzanine above to watch. Cameras clicked, microphones pointed. She stood behind a modest podium, flanked by crates of produce, Logan's notebook in hand. "I've heard the allegations," she began, "that I stole an idea, that I exploited grief, that I betrayed my family for attention." She paused, looking into the rows of journalists. "So today, I'd like to tell you where this idea really came from." She held up the notebook. This was written by Logan Hayes 5 years ago, not in a boardroom, not for a marketing team, but at a diner booth, on napkins, on the backs of receipts. He wasn't trying to sell anything. He was dreaming of a world where food wasn't a luxury. Grace placed the notebook on the table and flipped to a page, one marked with Logan's hand-drawn diagram of a 24-hour supply loop connecting farm co-ops to inner-city distribution points. This, she said, tapping the page, was dated 2 years before Oldham Market ever considered low-income delivery corridors. It predates Blake's alleged campaign by 26 months. Reporters scribbled furiously. Flashes popped, and she continued. We're releasing all 87 pages of Logan's notes today. You'll find not just strategy, but his heart, his belief that dignity begins with a dinner table. The air felt charged, like every word dropped another weight onto Oldham Market's shoulders. But it wasn't over. Also, she said, someone else has something to say. From the far side of the warehouse, a man stepped. Forward, mid-50s, pressed car keys, salt and pepper beard. He looked nervous. Franklin joined him, gave a reassuring pat on the back. My name is Marcus Develin, the man began into the mic. I was director of market expansion at Oldham Market for 17 years. I resigned 2 years ago. He cleared his throat. I saw the Logan Hayes model years ago, not through Grace, not through leaks, but through Edward Alden himself. The reporters murmured, pens pausing mid-sentence. Edward came into my office with a printout of an early version of Logan's proposal, said a kid had pitched it to a VC group and that the group had shared it with him confidentially. He said we should keep the concept quiet, called it too social service, not enough luxury. Devlin's voice wavered but firmed. 2 years later, we repackaged it. I was ordered to scrub the origin trail and list it as internally generated. I didn't know the kid's name then. I found out later it was Logan Hayes. Gasps audible now. Reporters looked at each other in disbelief. I left, Dellen continued, because that wasn't innovation. That was theft. Grace stood motionless, jaw clenched, hands resting on the podium. I've kept quiet for too long, Devlin finished. I'm here today because the truth matters and Logan deserves that. He stepped back. The room erupted. Within hours, hashtags trended. Hatch justice for Logan. Alden exposed. Grace was right. Major news outlets ran headlines like, former Alden director accuses CEO of idea theft. Heir turned whistleblower vindicated. Editorial shifted tone. Public opinion followed. On social media, comments poured in. Chills watching Marcus Devlin speak. Integrity isn't dead. Grace Hayes, you made your husband proud. Alden Market is everything wrong with corporate America. Blake released a panicked statement calling Devlin a disgruntled ex-employee. But the damage was done. In the boardroom, Grace's voice had once been silenced. In the warehouse, she was undeniable. That night, she sat alone in her office, staring at the last page of Logan's notebook. It read simply, "One day someone will believe." She ran her fingers over the ink and whispered, "They do now." The ballroom at the National Food Systems Summit pulsed with anticipation. Industry leaders, policymakers, non-profit advocates, and journalists filled every chair, murmuring in multiple languages, clinking glasses, adjusting ties. It was the kind of event Grace had once been groomed to attend in her father's shadow, silent, smiling, ornamental. But today she stood center stage. A large banner stretched across the back wall, feeding the future, innovation, equity, and impact. She stepped to the podium, dressed not in designer armor, but in a simple navy dress, No teleprompter, no rehearsed speech, just a folded piece of paper and Logan's notebook tucked under her arm like a shield. "Good evening," she began, voice steady. "I was told I should open with a story about growth metrics or market reach, but instead I'd like to tell you about a dinner table." Silence fell. 3 years ago, my daughter Harper made a salad out of dandelion leaves. She insisted it was gourmet. My son Noah watched her like she was the world's top chef. My husband Logan pretended to gag and declared it a 5-star disaster. Laughter rippled, but that meal was real, honest, made with what we had. And for a moment, we were rich. She paused. Not everyone gets that moment. Grace lifted the notebook. "This," she said, "was my husband's dream to get fresh food into the hands of every family, not just those with platinum cards, everyone." She turned a page. Heshresh didn't start with a product. It started with a question. What if food wasn't just fuel, but dignity? The room leaned in. "We don't sell groceries. We rebuild trust between communities and companies." "Between food and fairness," she closed the notebook. "I stand here not as a disruptor, not as an heirs, but as someone who lost everything and found purpose in the wreckage. Our mission isn't to dominate, it's to democratize, not to compete, but to complete what's been broken." The applause started slow. 1, 2, then a wave rising like thunder. People stood. Some wiped away tears. She stepped back, heart pounding, eyes scanning the crowd. And there, in the last row, he was watching. Edward Alden, her father, his hair greyer, face gaunter, still in the same dark suit, though it seemed to hang looser on his frame. Their eyes met, and for a moment everything around her went quiet. Later that night, in the suite Hazaresh had booked for her, Grace sat barefoot on the balcony, sipping mint tea, trying to let her heartbeat settle. Her phone buzzed, an unfamiliar number. She hesitated, then opened the message. "Meet me, Waldorf, room 303, one time only, EA." Her throat tightened. Not Dad, not even Edward, just 3 initials. She stared at the message for 10 full minutes, tea cooling in her hand. She thought of the last time she'd seen him at the dinner where he'd exiled her like a scandal. She thought of the funeral, of Blake's birthday party, of Vivian's cold message, of everything that had come since. Franklin's voice echoed in her memory. "You don't owe him anything." But something deeper, quieter said otherwise. Not obligation, closure. She grabbed her coat. The Waldorf's lobby glowed with quiet opulence. It was familiar down to the scent of lavender and lemon oil in the air. Grace walked to the elevator like a woman entering a mausoleum. "Room 303. She knocked once. The door opened. Edward stood alone inside. No assistant, no glass of scotch, just a man aged by loss and pride. He stepped aside wordlessly. Grace entered. The room was dim, curtained. A table sat in the center with 2 chairs, untouched water glasses between them. She didn't sit. He did. "You made quite the speech," he said, his voice. She said nothing. He looked older, not just in years, but in posture, the weight of everything pressing down at last. "You win," he added. "The press loves you. The shareholders don't trust Blake anymore. The board wants a transition. They want you back," she blinked. "What?" "You can have it," he said, gesturing vaguely. "The company, the name, the future." She stared at him. "I'm not here to reclaim your empire." Edward's jaw tightened. "You're still my daughter." Grace laughed low and bitter. Am I? You didn't come to the funeral. You didn't say their names. His eyes flickered. I had obligations. You had a choice, she said, stepping closer, and you chose champagne over caskets. He said nothing. You sent me away, she continued, because I loved someone you couldn't control. And now that your perfect son is failing, you want to cash in my grief like it's a redemption coupon. He looked away. I built something real, she said, voice rising, and I did it without your name, without your approval, without your rules. Silence. Finally, he asked, Why did you come? Grace stepped back, heading for the door, to say goodbye. Not because I owe you, because I owe it to myself. She opened the door. He stood. Grace, she turned. I love them, he said quietly. I just didn't know how to show it. Her throat burned. Then learn before it's too late again. She walked out, didn't look back. Edward remained standing long after Grace stepped toward the door, his hand gripping the edge of the table like he was anchoring himself to something real. Grace, wait! He called out softer this time, almost fragile. Please, she paused, fingers brushing the doorknob. I didn't bring you here just to apologize, he admitted. I need your help. She turned slowly. Help? He gestured for her to sit. Against her better judgment, she did, but on the edge of the chair, arms crossed. Oldham Market is unraveling, he said. The board is fracturing. Investors are panicking. We've lost 3 major contracts to Hayes Fresh in the last quarter alone. Her expression didn't change. I tried to keep up, he continued, eyes darting, but the market's different now. Customers want values, not marble countertops. That's not news, she said coldly. He nodded, swallowing hard. I made a mistake. Several. But the company, it doesn't deserve to die. She raised an eyebrow. What makes you think I care? Edward leaned in. Because you're still an Alden. No, she said immediately. I stopped being one the day you let my children go into the ground alone. He flinched but pushed on. Grace, if you come back, even as a figurehead, the board will stabilize. You have public trust. You're the only one who can restore our standing. She narrowed her eyes. This isn't about redemption. It's about reputation. He didn't deny it. There was a moment of silence before she asked, Why now? Why this sudden desperation? Edward hesitated. Then too quickly he said, We're restructuring. Standard board discussions. Nothing drastic. She tilted her head. You've never been a man of partial confessions. Still he said nothing. Grace stood, walking to the window. Manhattan glowed below. Busy, beautiful, indifferent. Who owns the company now? She asked, not turning. What do you mean? I saw the financials. Renshaw's name is missing. That's not just board reshuffling. That's a buyout. He didn't answer. She faced him. You sold part of Oldham Market, didn't you? He looked down. To who? She pressed. He exhaled. Astropac Holdings, a global investment firm based in Zurich. Her chest tightened. You sold American market share to a foreign conglomerate after spending your whole life preaching about heritage. It was a temporary partnership, he said quickly. Bridge capital. They promised autonomy. You mean they promised you a seat, not autonomy? He stood agitated. We needed liquidity. You think your Fresh in 24 rollout didn't force our hand? You backed me into a corner, she laughed. Short, sharp. Don't put this on me. You lost because you couldn't change. Edward's voice cracked. They were going to fire me. You should have let them, she said. Would have been the first honest thing to happen in that boardroom in decades. He moved toward her. We can fix it together. Bring the brand back. Your name still carries weight." Grace stepped back. "Stop calling it my name. I buried it the day I buried Harper and Noah." Silence. Edward looked smaller now, like a man whose suit no longer fit his legacy. "I know I was wrong," he whispered. "Wrong?" she snapped. "You were more than wrong. You were cruel, cold, absent. You chose your son's birthday party over my family's funeral. Do you understand that?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. She walked slowly to the door. "You lost me long before the market crumbled." He tried again. "Grace, please, I made one mistake." She turned, eyes blazing. "You didn't make one mistake. You made a choice, 1,000 silent, calculated choices. And now you're here because those choices cost you something for the first time." Her hand gripped the doorknob. She took one final look at him and said the last words she would ever say to her father. "I died to you the day you chose a glass of champagne over holding your grandchildren's lifeless hands. Don't call me again." She opened the door, walked out, and didn't look back. The numbers were undeniable. In the latest quarterly report, Hayes Fresh officially surpassed Alden Market in market share across 5 of the country's largest states: California, Illinois, New York, Texas, and Florida. Grace stared at the chart, not with glee, but with an emotion she hadn't expected: stillness. She remembered nights at the dining table with Logan, drawing crude maps of supply routes, arguing over metrics, laughing until Harper climbed onto Logan's shoulders, pretending to be the CEO of Lettuce. They had dreamed of impact, but this was transformation. The media exploded. Forbes called it the rise of the real. The Atlantic ran a profile titled "From Heiress to Humanitarian, the Woman Who Fed the Forgotten." But the name that stuck came from a quiet piece in the Seattle Times, a 2-page article written by a food columnist who had grown up in a food desert herself. She called Grace the CEO of Hearts, and that name stayed. People stopped her on the street not for autographs but for gratitude. Mothers hugged her with tears. Grocery clerks asked to shake her hand. One elderly farmer mailed her a handwritten thank you letter saying, "You made us matter again." But Grace's next move wasn't another acquisition or campaign. It was something smaller, more personal. She created the Harper and Noah Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing daily fresh meals to children in underserved communities. The program partnered with local schools, after-hour centers, and shelters. Every meal came with a handwritten card by a volunteer. Some cards read, "You are seen." Others simply said, "You matter." The first pilot city was Baltimore, then Detroit, then Fresno. In less than a year, the foundation had provided over 2 million meals. Grace oversaw everything, not from a distance. She visited kitchens. She washed produce. She sat with children at school cafeterias and listened to their dreams. She wasn't trying to replace Harper and Noah, but she was trying to make sure their names lived on, not as tragedy, but as nourishment. One full morning during a board meeting at Hayes Fresh, her executive team paused to present her with something unconnected: a plaque bearing the logo of the company, a heart-shaped apple, and beneath it an inscription in honor of the children who taught us how to build something real. Grace didn't speak. She couldn't. That afternoon, she walked alone to the rooftop garden Hayes Fresh had built as part of its sustainability initiative. Rows of lettuce, herbs, and cherry tomatoes swayed in the breeze. She stood at the edge looking over the city. She pulled out her phone, scrolled past business alerts, press requests, analytics, dashboards, until she found a photo folder simply named Ours. She tapped on a video. Harper's voice filled the air. "Noah, stop eating all the strawberries." Logan's laugh echoed. "He's a quality control officer, babe." Grace let it play until the screen dimmed. Her tears came quietly, not like before, not the wild, uncontrollable sobs of loss, but the kind of tears that water something growing. She whispered, "We did it. We really did." That evening, Franklin found her in the hallway outside the boardroom, staring at the wall of framed campaign photos. "You're making them proud," he said softly. "I hope so." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "You gave the world what they gave you, love that feeds," she smiled. "Not bad for a woman who once got fired over a vineyard acquisition," he chuckled. "Not bad at all." Then he handed her a letter. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." Inside was a certificate. The Harper and Noah Foundation has been awarded the Change. Edward's voice cracked. "They were going to fire me. You should have let them," she said. "Would have been the first honest thing to happen in that boardroom in decades." He moved toward her. "We can fix it together. Bring the brand back. Your name still carries weight." Grace stepped back. "Stop calling it my name. I buried it the day I buried Harper and Noah." Silence. Edward looked smaller now, like a man whose suit no longer fit his legacy. "I know I was wrong," he whispered. "Wrong?" she snapped. "You were more than wrong. You were cruel, cold, absent. You chose your son's birthday party over my family's funeral. Do you understand that?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. She walked slowly to the door. "You lost me long before the market crumbled." He tried again. "Grace, please, I made one mistake." She turned, eyes blazing. "You didn't make one mistake. You made a choice, 1,000 silent, calculated choices. And now you're here because those choices cost you something for the first time." Her hand gripped the doorknob. She took one final look at him and said the last words she would ever say to her father. "I died to you the day you chose a glass of champagne over holding your grandchildren's lifeless hands. Don't call me again." She opened the door, walked out, and didn't look back. The numbers were undeniable. In the latest quarterly report, Hayes Fresh officially surpassed Alden Market in market share across 5 of the country's largest states: California, Illinois, New York, Texas, and Florida. Grace stared at the chart, not with glee, but with an emotion she hadn't expected: stillness. She remembered nights at the dining table with Logan, drawing crude maps of supply routes, arguing over metrics, laughing until Harper climbed onto Logan's shoulders, pretending to be the CEO of Lettuce. They had dreamed of impact, but this was transformation. The media exploded. Forbes called it the rise of the real. The Atlantic ran a profile titled "From Heiress to Humanitarian, the Woman Who Fed the Forgotten." But the name that stuck came from a quiet piece in the Seattle Times, a 2-page article written by a food columnist who had grown up in a food desert herself. She called Grace the CEO of Hearts, and that name stayed. People stopped her on the street not for autographs, but for gratitude. Mothers hugged her with tears. Grocery clerks asked to shake her hand. One elderly farmer mailed her a handwritten thank you letter, saying, "You made us matter again." But Grace's next move wasn't another acquisition or campaign. It was something smaller, more personal. She created the Harper and Noah Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to providing daily fresh meals to children in underserved communities. The program partnered with local schools, after-hour centers, and shelters. Every meal came with a handwritten card by a volunteer. Some cards read, "You are seen." Others simply said, "You matter." The first pilot city was Baltimore, then Detroit, then Fresno. In less than a year, the foundation had provided over 2 million meals. Grace oversaw everything, not from a distance. She visited kitchens, she washed produce, she sat with children at school cafeterias and listened to their dreams. She wasn't trying to replace Harper and Noah, but she was trying to make sure their names lived on, not as tragedy, but as nourishment. One full morning during a board meeting at Hayes Fresh, her executive team paused to present her with something unconnected, a plaque bearing the logo of the company, a heart-shaped apple, and beneath it an inscription in honor of the children who taught us how to build something real. Grace didn't speak. She couldn't. That afternoon, she walked alone to the rooftop garden Hayes Fresh had built as part of its sustainability initiative. Rows of lettuce, herbs, and cherry tomatoes swayed in the breeze. She stood at the edge looking over the city. She pulled out her phone, scrolled past business alerts, press requests, analytics, dashboards, until she found a photo folder simply named Ours. She tapped on a video. Harper's voice filled the air. "Noah, stop eating all the strawberries." Logan's laugh echoed. "He's a quality control officer, babe." Grace let it play until the screen dimmed. Her tears came quietly, not like before, not the wild, uncontrollable sobs of loss, but the kind of tears that water something growing. She whispered, "We did it. We really did." That evening, Franklin found her in the hallway outside the boardroom, staring at the wall of framed campaign photos. "You're making them proud," he said softly. "I hope so." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "You gave the world what they gave you, love that feeds," she smiled. "Not bad for a woman who once got fired over a vineyard acquisition," he chuckled. "Not bad at all." Then he handed her a letter. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." Inside was a certificate. The Harper and Noah Foundation has been awarded the